Hello and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to discuss spiritual cults, communities, communes, and various elements that arise from explorations on those ventures. So let's start with looking at some of the positives. Firstly, many people, when they are starting to explore spiritual endeavors, there's a state of lack, I suppose, that becomes very prevalent, right? A knowing that there's something else, something more. And so that's where the seeker usually begins, is looking for that thing that feels like it's missing. And the aspirant will explore all different avenues, different practices, find different teachers and methods and religions and whatever it might be. And this is always looking, seeking, looking for this thing. So because of that, there's often a feeling of being out of place in the beginning. You don't know where you belong, how you fit in, all of these types of mentalities. So people become quite transient and wayward. I recognize I say this while living in a van, but the view is real good. So people become quite transient, seeking this unknown thing. Where is it? What is it? There's something there. I don't know what it is, but I know there's something. So then you encounter a community that does something for you that you haven't been able to do yourself, which is to hopefully, based off the community, accept you. And this is a very, very rare skill. And many communities don't do this, but they'll sort of hint at an ability to do it, but it's more like, I accept you fully and completely as long as you follow these rules, and there's things to note there. So an example might be, if you want to join a little cult or a commune, maybe you sign over all of your bank account, all your assets, everything that you have, into the purview of that particular community. Now, this seems, from one perspective, like a really not so intelligent thing to do, and like something that, would be quite dangerous in the long run. What if you want to leave? What if all the work that you do while you are part of that community, you no longer reap individual financial benefits from? So there's obvious, the downsides of that are very obvious. From another perspective, you have this giving over of yourself, so a type of surrender of your own safety, in a sense, your own financial security and safety, and you give that safety, that security, into the hands of the group. So this could go, one of a couple ways. Well, or not so good. And someone, ends up pulling some funny strings and running away with everybody's money. So there are these types of things, potential things, where you go, okay, you get acceptance, okay, and welcome to the group under certain conditions. Of course, there's like the famous sex cults where some of those conditions is like, if you go in with your wife, you don't get to sleep with your wife, but the leader of the cult gets to sleep with your wife. Probably not a good move. So there's obvious pitfalls, right? But there are, within those potential pitfalls, some positive attributes. Okay, so in the experience of surrendering your security to a group, you really have to develop a trust, a faith, and you really get to work on that surrender. So this can be, for many people, quite relieving. Now, if you are in this space of seeking that absent thing, many people on that path who have felt out of place have often experienced a type of social, they're socially weird usually, in one way or another, and there's a type of social rejection which then cascades and bounces off the person. So you have the internal experience, and then that gets validated by the external experience of social rejection, which bounces back into the internal experience of, I don't fit in, I don't belong, all this stuff. And those keep bouncing back and forth and growing. So if you're working on your own, you would have the internal development protocols or whatever to start altering the internal self-image, the internal landscape. And over time, you cultivate a freedom in that landscape that changes you from the thing that experiences itself in a position of lack, and in a position of, being isolated and awkward and rejected and all of these things. You alter that internally, and then the external starts to reflect that. This method takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and for many people, it's a pursuit of futility, in the sense that the change isn't really happening beyond the very superficial will. And this would be very often found in like the affirmations one might speak to themselves in the mirror in the morning or whatever, if that's your thing, where the projection is superficial. It's just on the surface. It's done through words, and the reverberation of that particular change isn't actually permeating through all the layers of the being. So one of the fastest ways to facilitate change, to facilitate the real deep change, is to have the external environment reflect that change first, right? So instead of altering or surrendering all these aspects of the acquired self, the habitual self, that are blocking us from these relationships and potentials at many spectrums, not just with people, but spiritually as well. Let's say from a very coarse level, the raw being accepted by other people. If you go into a group of people and the entire group looks at you with absolute acceptance, that can create very fast change internally to an individual. And so this is one of the most common threads. If you pull it, almost everyone who is in a cult or a commune or a group of some sort, especially when it comes to the spiritual side of things, which we'll get to shortly. But this is a thread that most will have in common, is if they tell you their story, it will be, I felt out of place, I tried all these things, I went to this place, and everything, it felt like the right place to be. And so the external landscape was designed in such a way and cultivated in the individuals in such a way that for someone just entering, it opened up all these doors of release and surrender and self-acceptance and these self-image changes. So this is really important because as much as we might like to be self-sufficient, and of course that sovereignty must come, the speed at which that change can happen can be drastically increased through external stimulation of whatever the internal change that we're looking for might be. Okay, so because we might walk into a community Or, I mean, this could apply to, of course, like live-in communes and cults and stuff, but it also might apply to a teacher who you might train with, who maybe there's a community around a teacher or around that teacher's school, and this becomes very, very tricky because the skill of a teacher, if there's a community around a teacher, the likelihood that that teacher is kind of off their nut with their own ego is very high. So it takes a very developed teacher to step back from the community while that might develop around them, while still encouraging the positive effects that community can have. So this is, it's a skillful thing that has to be developed in order to do this, a skillful human and a developed human, because there's a lot of astral weirdness that can build up on that front. So you walk into, whether it's the teacher's place or the community, and you get these external validations of the internal change you're looking for. The inside changes because when it looks out, instead of experiencing rejection or the like, you're weird, what's up, whatever it might be that the person's used to experiencing, they experience acceptance. And so the internal reflection reaches out, right? It reaches out, it's looking for threat, it's looking for its place in the world, and it reaches out. And instead of reaching out and touching the negative thing, it touches the thing that reflects a positive change, and boom, all this stuff opens up, right? So there's a lot of value in that. Okay, now the same applies to individual teachers. If you're going to study with a teacher, the same thing occurs, where instead of pressurizing the part of you that is in lack, which would be done through telling you what all your problems are, which is very beginner level teaching and creates very, very big pitfalls down the road. So something to look out for. And it's also a stage that a teacher goes through. So, there's some students that resonate with that at that point in their particular path. And so there's growth together on that front. But from a higher level of refinement, there's none of that. All right. So the teacher views the student from the position of everything, absolute acceptance and everything that the student can and could be without imposing specificity through the vision, right? So that, and the feeling scape, of course, and that's very important. Okay, so we've looked at that side of things. External view that allows for internal change in an expedited way. Then from there, you get into all the intricacies of how the community might function in terms of taking care of themselves and the community and putting everybody else in the community first. That's usually a pretty good one. I was recently invited to a dinner with a very nice sort of live-in commune of folks, and one of their main I guess like ways of being was to place other people above yourself. So I sat in at their dinner, and I sat in at a little I guess like an introspection circle, not so much like a meditation or prayer circle, but more like an introspection circle. So because they're all always putting everybody else before themselves, everybody's taken care of and everybody's cared for. And there was a really nice group of people, and the astral landscape that had been cultivated through this was quite calm, quite peaceful. It was a very quiet astral atmosphere, which is always, a good thing to note, a very quiet astral atmosphere, which was nice. And almost everybody had very good focus and presence. They could sit with you and look at you and talk with you. Some of the other rules that they had were, none of them had phones. There was no cell phones out. There was nothing like that. I think everyone has an email address, but and there might be like a community phone, like one phone for the whole place, for like actual phone calls. So it was a very quiet astral atmosphere, very open-hearted, which was nice to see. And also the focus was there because the attention isn't being robbed all the time by being fractured, right? So some positive stuff there. Now, when you get into the spiritual side of things, and so this was a sort of a God-driven community, an Our Father type of community, a bring heaven onto the earth type of community, and they do a good job at supporting all the other branches of their community. When you get into the spiritual side of things, this is in a community, this is where you start running into some potential problems. Okay? One, you're encouraged by the community to experience things a certain way. So if someone says, we believe that blah, 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 in the absence of developed clair skills, clairsentience, clairvoyance, all this stuff, and in the absence of highly developed spiritual skill sets, we believe in this, in that, and the other thing. Well, now we're starting to run into issues of very dense compartmentalization and fabrications of the mind. So we have to be very careful of that. Any belief or faith is based off of, in a good system, or as the system develops more and more, is based off of experience and repeated evolutions of confirmatory experience. Not fabricating confirmatory experience, but actual awareness of the energetic substrate that's working and your perceptions of said things and of the stillness that lies beneath. So as you move more and more into a resonance with the stillness, you can start to see the perturbations and blockages that are in hindrance to that stillness, or that lack of clinging, lack of latching and cohesion, which will occur psychologically and astrally, right? So you get these imposed beliefs, right? And these beliefs that are clung to because these beliefs allow one to sustain their relationship with being accepted with that community. Okay? So these are very introspective people, and were doing a really good job in their development. Issues that were prevalent were the very vague explorations from a spiritual standpoint, and the from what I could gather, there wasn't too much there was individualistic study, but a little less individual practice and development from the practice standpoint, from the development of the meditative space. Now, the workings of the community itself can facilitate a lot of change. Like we said, simple things like not having access to too many distractions, and looking at the person you're speaking to as if they are the most important thing in the world, right? That alone can have quite meditative-esque offshoots of skill development and quality development of the human. So there's different ways of evolving things. Now, of course, we run into the issue of if everything is being developed through the external, through the community, through the external validation, then this starts to entrench the individual into the need to sustain a relationship with that community for those results. And here is probably the biggest error that we can run into. And I say error because it creates a dependency, right? Unification, like higher and higher, more refined spiritual union, does not come through dependency. It comes through sovereignty. And this is a very confusing thing until you start to really experience this. The sovereignty has to be there. How is the sovereignty there? It's there through equanimity, through deep, deep, deep equanimity. And that equanimity becomes so refined that this brings us into the Akasha, this deep, deep, deep Akasha, right? And from that place, that's where you get, that's where the sovereignty comes from, because you're not bound, your state is not bound to the way in which you are perceived or communicated with or interacted with from a psychological or emotional layer with the group, right? So you can use living in a group like that for some very valuable developmental shifts, right? If you're having trouble making those shifts yourself, you entrench yourself in a community that encourages you to open up and evolve, okay? So there's value in that for sure. It can speed up that process. The overall group consciousness, we will rise to the level of the group consciousness relatively quickly. What is accepted as true in the group, the individual will get sucked into that. However, the individual will also be capped or pulled down, anchored down by that very same group consciousness that brought them up. So this takes it takes a lot of skill to navigate that if you're going to stay in a group and somehow grow beyond the confines of that particular group identity. Okay, so cohesion, right? The coming together of the group is one, but it needs to be let go of so that you can then evolve, right, as individuals, have the freedom to depart from that particular community, right, and the freedom to come back. So of course, bank account issues might be a thing. Other protocols that are common in temples or whatever, no sexual misconduct or no sexual conduct whatsoever. These are common things. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are being encouraged to have no quote-unquote relations prior to marriage, these types of things, well, is there positive value to that? Yes. You break free of the habits that are involved in lust, the habits that are involved in the weird types of connections that we make psychologically and astrally in relation to culture and sex and culture and relationships and culture and marriage and all this stuff. But you have the culture of that group, right? You still have the culture of that group. So for a certain level of development, right, of individuals, as an individual reaches a certain refinement in their and on their path, you're going to end up moving away from any group that is imposing any type of action, specific action on you, or specific non-action on you, right? Why would you move away from that? Well, you essentially you start to move beyond that. Those are great scaffoldings for people who are come in wayward off the street, in the beginning of the path, in deep pits of confusion, of unknown, of despair, despondency, etc., etc., etc. These can be very valuable scaffoldings, but any and all scaffoldings are just training wheels, right? They are training wheels. So communities tend to pedestalize scaffolding, just like religions and all of these things. You pedestalize scaffolding, or you pedestalize the process as if it is the thing that you're striving for, but it is not. It is merely a scaffolding, training wheels, so that you can navigate around and start to come into equanimity, and get rid of all the habits that are sort of, holding you back, right? Or getting in the way of your spiritual evolution, right? So this brings us into the next part of this, which is, if you've worked through this scaffolding, and you've actually developed to higher and higher degrees from a spiritual standpoint, you won't have an us and them type of attitude, and you won't have or hold any derisive mind relationships or astral relationships with what you're doing and other systems. So if there is an expression of the us and the them, us and the outsiders, right, who don't know any better, this is prevalent in most spiritual systems. We are better because we have this secret knowledge. We can do these things. We have connection to these whatevers. And that creates an us and a them. And that's a platform on which the ego is very comfortable resting, right? The place in which the ego hides most easily, most deeply, tenaciously, and perniciously is in the very path that we are taking to eradicate it, or to surrender beyond those confines. That is where it will hide. Okay, so you might have baked into the culture a release of this through, say, caring for other people more than you care for yourself. That might be baked into a community. However, the hive mind of the community might still very well be us and them, the insiders, the outsiders. Any making fun of other religious whatevers, whether it be a very common one these days is, the Christianity is the bane of all evil. In terms of how, even to this day, there's all that locked knowledge in the Vatican. There's all this stuff that, like, of course, there are issues with compartmentalized religion. But if everyone in your community has as part of their identity a disdain towards one particular religion or group of people or whatever, this is where you're getting into some big isms, right? Whether it be racism or religious ism, whatever it is, these things that are, now you're starting to develop a sticking point that any and all weird shit you observe in the world or whatever starts to be blamed on this thing. Oh, well, society says blah, blah, blah. Our society tells us this. That's a common one, and is there truth in it? Sure, right? Some truth is a very tricky thing, because a little truth is a wonderful breeding ground for disdain, for anger, for hatred, for all of these negative astral traits which do harm. So there has to be an individual practice that is sovereign to the individual in any community that frees them from the bindings of that community, right? That's a really tricky thing to bake into a community, because people have to be at a certain level of development where there is that freedom. And to bring people up to a level of development where there's that freedom is very tricky, because people will want the astral scaffolding. They'll want the identity scaffolding. And when you aren't feeding gloriously the identity through these us and thems, these we are better, we know better, we have a more natural way of life, closer to the earth, this, that, the other thing, whatever the community might be, closer to the light, whatever it might be. The ego loves that. And so if you aren't feeding that in people who are newer, who are just beginning, there's no juicy astral yumminess to cling to and to support the development, or not development, but to support the individual's astral emotional desire to stay, right? So if you walk into a community and everyone's telling you how amazing you are, if you don't have too much development, that feels real good. Yeah, you know what? I am amazing. I am part of this amazing thing. You know, me. I feel great with these emotions. I love my yummy emotions. You know, these are my feelies and I like them. So that feels great. If everyone is taking care of you and you are used to feeling that separation from society and your peers, well, it's very easy to become ingratiated and then join a group out of ingratiation. So you need to have your own stuff together. Be grounded, have deep equanimity, deep connection to light, which will come through Akasha. And because of this, because your identity through good training over time becomes so expansive and free and unified, that you won't easily succumb to these group, what do you call it when something merges into something else, where you won't whatever it would be, succumb to like a group identity. That will be harder for you to succumb to. You will far more easily sustain your spiritual sovereignty, which allows for your spiritual unity. All right, so really find a good training process and build your way through it. Cultivate your relationship with the elements. Understand if you go into a group, if you're aware of your thoughts and your feelings to a very profound degree, and you're not attached to being looked at in a certain way or whatever, well, that allows you to enter a space, engage with that group at whatever level that they're at, or layer that might be the predominant tuning fork of that group, and do your best to accept what is being offered to you, which might be just a lot of hospitality and kindness, as I experienced with this group the other night. Very gracious, kind, hospitable, introspective, intelligent people, creative, and engage at that layer. Do your best to inspire and offer further growth to that community. So it's so easy to look at a group and go, oh, they're all idiots. They all got, manipulated and fooled into this thing or whatever. But you always, that might just be your own shit talking, right? So we always want to be as equanimous as possible. And just like the inside of the group might look at the outside and go, oh, we're better, we're smarter, we know best. It's very common these days from the outside of a particular group to look at the people that are of that group, of that cult, whatever it might be, and go, oh, those idiots who are so silly and so easily manipulated, etc., etc., and place ourselves above them. Or from the inside, you place ourselves from the inside above the outside. Like, it's existing in both planes. So be aware of this. Cultivate your equanimity. Constantly, through sovereignty and unity, octaving out and up the fractals of identity that you're able to surrender into. And this keeps the process going. Okay, so lots of potential positives, lots of potential negatives. Okay, the goal of any group when it comes to the individual is not to eradicate the individuality of the individuals. Okay, it's not to subsume the individuals into the group. Okay, it at its base layer is to awaken and enlighten the constant evolving cascade and reticulation of sovereignty and unity in a evolving way. Okay, so things to think about, and really finding our own equanimity, cultivating that, and everything that comes out of that as you're working the spiritual path is so important to keep us free, right? To keep us choiceful, so we aren't acting out of any type of delusion, which, that's a constant process of evolution as well. Okay, all right, I think that's it for this one. I can't think of anything else at the moment. I hope you enjoyed this. This will be available on Spotify as well. If you're interested in training with me, I have a in-person workshop coming up at the end of June, beginning of June 2025. This is a 16-day spiritual attunement retreat, levels 1 and 2. So you can check details out on the website in the description here. And I have online courses that you can look at that take you step by step through both Tai Chi and Qi Gong, Hermetic Magic, meditation, Hermetic Alchemy. And of course, there's also via video in-person private coaching sessions as well, so you can get in touch if you're interested in that. All right, thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed this. See you on the next one. Bye.